just, oh, it's official. We're officially being recorded. Okay, well, Boker Tov, good morning, friends. I guess we'll start. Yeah, it's almost 10:35. So I just wanted to, as we've been doing for the past month, I think this is the fourth week that we've been studying together. It's wonderful. We have been dedicating all of our learning in memory of our dear friend Joan Hulkauer, who just passed away. And this is the final class, and it's a class about a woman who leaves her birthplace and her homeland and travels to an unknown place with an unknown language, which feels very much like it mirrors Joan's early life when she left Europe. Ruth is also a woman of grace and fortitude who possesses a beautiful soul. And the Hebrew word for grace is chen, and that's where we get the name Hannah from, and that was Joan's name, was Hannah Ruth. And according to Webster, the English word Ruth means compassion for the misery of another, and ruthless means have no compassion. So Hannah Ruth, that seems like the perfect name, that Joan's name was Hannah Ruth, a woman of grace and compassion. And the rabbis teach Kishma Kenhi, as your name is, so are you. And that's how I feel about studying Ruth today in Joan's memory. And I can't think of a more powerful way to invoke her blessed memory than to cap our month of study with the book of Ruth. So we hope, Joan, that your memory will always be for a blessing and that you're still very much with us. So let's say our bracha, and then we will mute. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitotav tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, our Lord, our God, who has given us your commandments and commanded us to study and engage with Torah. So today we're doing going to be doing the book of Ruth. And the arc of the class is we're actually going to read the book of Ruth, which is very short. It's more like a short story than a book, and we'll put it in its biblical context, and we'll discuss some of the background, and then we'll talk about some of the themes. And we're going to be reading Ruth. We read Ruth on the second day of Shavuot, which is literally 1 week from today, which feels like a perfect segue. And the basic message in the book of Ruth is about loving kindness. Ruth is, like I said, it's the book of Ruth, but it's more like a short story. And the first and last chapters sort of balance each other's out, because the first chapter details the descent into the tragedy, and the fourth chapter is the ascent. There's tranquility and there's peace. The rabbis sort of grapple with how to read the book of Ruth. Is the book of Ruth a book where God is in control, or is God dependent on our chesed? Not so much God dependent, but is God waiting for our chesed to make things happen in the book of Ruth? The book of Ruth also echoes 4 different stories in the Torah. It first echoes the story of Lot, who was Abraham's nephew. If you recall, Lot was saved from Sodom and Gomorrah when they were destroyed, and we'll look at Lot's lineage and how that affects the book of Ruth in just a minute. The second story that's echoed in the book of Ruth is Rebecca at the well. If you recall that when it was time for Abraham to marry off his son Isaac, he chose to send his servant, or his right-hand man, Eliezer, to go find a wife for Rebecca, for Isaac. And Eliezer said, prayed to God and said, well, when I get to the well, the woman who will show me kindness and bring me water to drink, or bring my camels to drink, that will be the one, that will be the wife for Isaac. And that's exactly what happened. So Rebecca's kindness is echoed in the book of Ruth. The third biblical story that's echoed in the book of Ruth is the Jacob story, when he travels east to Mesopotamia, where he finds his wives, Leah and Rachel. Leah was, interestingly, was the mother of Judah, whose tribe included the territory of Bethlehem, which is where the story of Ruth takes place. And at the end of the book of Ruth, Ruth is blessed by the women of the city that she should be like Rachel and Leah. And indeed, Ruth is proactive, the same way that Rachel and Leah were, in order to keep keep the dynasties going, as Ruth becomes the great-grandmother of King David. And the fourth story from the Bible that's echoed in the book of Ruth is the story of Tamar and Judah. And Judah was, as we mentioned, the fourth son of Jacob and Leah. And Tamar also is a woman who takes matters into her own hands in order to perpetuate her husband's memory. And we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a couple minutes also. So the first thing we're going to do, as I mentioned, is we're going to look at the book of Ruth, because let me just do my screen share. Master source sheet. Oh, Mazel Tov. There we go. Okay, so we're going to read like I said, we're reading the book of Ruth, but it's really a short story, so that when we reference, we know what we're talking about. So I have it here, and I'm of course going to ask for volunteers. We've got 4 chapters, so if we could have 4 volunteers, that would be terrific.
I can read.
Okay. Thank you so much.
In the days when the chieftains ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah, with his wife and 2 sons, went to reside in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons were named Mahlon and Chilion.
Yeah, Machlon and Kilion, right. These names mean sickness and plague. So when they talk about, be careful what you name your children. And it's interesting, it starts off in the days of the chieftains, in the days Vayihi Bimei, which is exactly how the book of the book of Esther starts out, the Megillah of Esther, in the days of. Yeah, okay.
Ephratites in Bethlehem in Judah. They came to the country of Moab and remained there.
Right. There was a famine in the land. I'll annotate this a little bit. Sure. There was a famine in the land, and we're not exactly sure why there was a famine. One of the Midrashim says that, in the book of Judges, which this happens around the book of Judges, that's basically a cycle of Israel. The Israelites are doing bad things. God punishes them. They repent, and the cycle starts over again. So this was in one of the down cycles, and God was saying, well, I can't take you back to Egypt. I'm not going to put you back in slavery. So the Midrash says, God says, well, what I'll do is I'll bring a famine. So therefore, that's how there winds up being a famine.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Sure.
The word in Hebrew is shoftim, which is judges.
Right.
Why does this say chieftains? Is it the same thing?
Yeah, that's how they're. It's judges, but that's how they are. I think this is from Sepharia, so that's how they are translating it. That's always the problem. To shofet means to judge. That the verb means to judge, and this is always the challenge. There are so many different kinds of translations that are out there. This one I took is from Sepharia, which is by the way, a great source to have online if you're ever interested in reading anything from the Bible. Okay, Ellen, I keep interrupting you.
That's okay. Well, it's Joanne, but
Joanne, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I can't see the name. Okay.
Okay. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. Then those 2, Mahlon and Chilion, also died. So the woman was left with her 2 sons, without her 2 sons, and without her husband. She started out with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for in the country of Moab she had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food.
It's interesting. First of all, this is the first time we hear about return. We're going to hear a lot about return, especially in the first chapter, about the idea of returning back to the land. And it's interesting, it said that she had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food. She didn't really know for sure, so we don't know if this is rumor. But Moab is about 45 miles east of where Beit Lechem is, where they left. So, and 45 miles doesn't sound like a big deal to us, but when you consider that they always went by foot or by camel, it's a bit of a trip. Yeah.
Accompanied by her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, and they set out on the road back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Turn back, each of you, to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that each of you find security in the house of a husband." And she kissed them farewell. They broke into weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters. for I am too old to be married. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I were married tonight, and I also bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you, on their account, debar yourselves from marriage? Oh no, my daughters, my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me.
It's interesting when she says my lot is far more bitter than yours. She's referring to the fact that they lost their husbands, but she lost her husband and her two sons, and also her status, because part of the issue was that Elimelech was a leader. Her late husband, was one of the leaders of Israel, and the Midrash says that they decided to leave town when the famine struck because they didn't want people knocking on their door to sort of, hey, help us out. And the people were demoralized when your leader, when there's a crisis and the leader skips town instead of showing leadership, it demoralizes the people even more than just the famine.
They broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, see, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law. But Ruth replied, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God.
Okay, if you're not muted, could you please mute, because there seems to be a lot of background. Thank you.
All right, so what else? Yeah, I guess I'll just wait till I get.
Is that the office that's not muted?
Maybe.
Kathy, can you mute, please? I'll send her a text.
She's not near the seat.
Okay, I'm gonna send her.
Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to argue with her, and the two went on until they reached Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, can this be Naomi?
And it's interesting, the Midrash says that the reason the whole city was there to greet them was because this was the day of Boaz's wife's funeral. So the whole city happened to be together and they saw them coming back.
Okay. Do not call me Naomi, she replied. Call me Mara, for Shaddai has made my lot very bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. How can you tell me Naomi when the Lord call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me? Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabite. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest.
Right. It's interesting they talk about that she's returning with Ruth, but Ruth was a Moabite. Ruth was not from there. So the idea of Ruth returning, she wasn't there. So that's interesting that so that's why I think the last sentence says that she returned with her daughter-in-law. Okay. Chapter 2. You want to continue, Joanne? You're doing a great job.
Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a man of substance of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, I would like to go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain behind someone who may show me kindness. Yes, daughter, go, she replied, and off she went. She came and gleaned in a field behind the reapers, and as luck would have it, it was the piece of land belonging to Boaz, who was of Elimelech's family.
It's also interesting, by the way, that Ruth, again, there's a lot of midrashim because the text is pretty sparse. A lot of midrashim that say that Ruth and Naomi and Orpah were princesses, that their father was King Eglon, who was the king of Moab. So they had a very charmed and lovely life. So all of a sudden, this woman who had this charmed life is saying, she's now reduced to, well, I'll pull up my sleeves and I'll go gather food because that's the only way we're going to eat.
Presently, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem. He greeted the reapers. The Lord be with you. And they responded, the Lord bless you.
So the first time, by the way, God makes an appearance in the book, not doing anything, but first time we even hear about God.
Boaz said to the servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose girl is that? The servant in charge of the reapers replied, she is a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. She has been on her feet ever since she came this morning. She has rested but little in the hut. Boaz said to Ruth, listen to me, daughter. Don't go to glean in another field, don't go elsewhere, but stay here close to my girls. Keep your eyes on the field they are reaping and follow them. I have ordered the men not to molest you, and when you are thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water that the men have drawn.
Yeah, imagine what this whole scene is like, right? I mean, this is how the poor people got to eat. When the wealthy people they would leave the corners of their farms, and leave the fields empty, or not empty. They wouldn't harvest, so that the poor people could go and catch what was on the side, and they had water and jugs for them. I mean, it was a whole different system of taking care of the poor than just being able to give them money. It was actually taking care of them.
She prostrated herself with her face to the ground and said to him, why are you so kind as to single me out when I am a foreigner? Boaz said in reply, I have been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known before. May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge. She answered, you are most kind, my lord, to comfort me and to speak gently to your maidservant, though I am not so much as one of your maidservants. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here and partake of the meal and dip your morsel in the vinegar. So she sat down beside the reapers. He handed her roasted grain and she ate her fill and had some left over.
Yeah, when you think about the dipping the morsel in the vinegar, I mean, basically they probably took pita and they were dipping it in hummus or something like that. You know, typical Middle Eastern kind of food. Okay, there we go.
When she got up again to glean, Boaz gave orders to his workers. You are not only to let her glean among the sheaves without interference, but you must also pull some stalks out of the heaps and leave them for her to glean and not scold her. She gleaned in the field until evening, and then she beat out what she had gleaned. It was about an ephah of barley, and carried it back with her to the town. When her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and when she also took out and gave her what she had left over after eating her fill, her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be he who took such generous notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law whom she had worked with, saying, the name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz.
Yeah, I looked up an ephah, and an ephah of barley is about 25 pounds. So she's carrying this 25 pounds. It's a lot. It's a lot of food. A lot of food. That's why Ruth is saying to her, Naomi is saying, who gave you all that? It's one thing to glean what's left in the fields, but how'd you come home with 25 pounds?
Right. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who has not failed in his kindness to the living or to the dead. For Naomi explained to her daughter-in-law, the man is related to us. He is one of our redeeming kinsmen. Ruth, the Moabite, said, he even told me, stay close by my workers until all my harvest is finished. And Naomi answered her daughter-in-law, Ruth, it is best, daughter, that you go out with his girls and not be annoyed in some other field. So she stayed close to the maidservants of Boaz and gleaned until the barley harvest and the wheat harvest were finished. Then she stayed at home with her mother-in-law.
Okay. Does somebody else want to pick up chapter 3?
If I will, if no one else wants.
Go ahead.
Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, daughter, I must seek a home for you where you may be happy.
Oh, by the way, you notice that she's not the daughter-in-law anymore. The last 3 times she's referred to her as daughter. Okay, speaks to their relationship. Yeah.
Now there is our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he lies down and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will,
go ahead. Sorry.
He will tell you what you are to do.
This is a very risque thing that women were not supposed to go to where the boss was, okay, the owner is. And of course, when he says, uncover his legs, there are many midrashim that say it's not uncovering his legs, but she's uncovering his sexual parts. And, and she's coming on to him, but she's not coming on to him in a physical way. So, as we'll read.
She replied, I will do everything you tell me. She went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her.
Okay, so start with 7. There we go, Boaz.
Okay. Boaz ate and drank, and in a cheerful mood went to lie down beside the grain pile. Then she went over stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, the man gave a start and pulled back, where there was a young woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. And she replied, I am your handmaid, Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman.
Yeah, the redeeming kinsman has to do with levirate marriage, which the Torah talks about in Deuteronomy chapter 25. If a man dies and didn't have any children, his widow is supposed to marry his brother so that his name will be perpetuated, and it also has to do with the land being passed on. So that's when they talk about redeeming. And then if he doesn't want to, it's a whole yibum ceremony that happens if he doesn't want to take her on. But this was really important. So that's what he means by a redeemer. He was part of the same family. So, because she couldn't marry her late husband's brother because he was also dead. Okay.
He exclaimed, be blessed of the Lord, daughter. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first, in that you have not turned to younger men, whether poor or rich. And now, daughter, have no fear. I will do in your behalf whatever you ask, for all the elders of my town know what a fine woman you are. But while it is true, I am a redeeming kinsman, there is another redeemer closer than I. Stay for the night, then stay
13.
for the night. Then in the morning, if he will act as a redeemer, good, let him redeem. But if he does not want to act as redeemer for you, I will do so myself. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. So she lay at his feet until dawn. She rose before one person could distinguish another, for he thought, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, hold out the shawl you were wearing. She held it while he measured out 6 measures of barley, and he put it on her back. When she got back to the town, she came to her mother-in-law, who asked, how is it with you, daughter? She told her all that the man had done for her, and she added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying to me, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. And Naomi said, stay here, daughter, till you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today.
Okay, chapter 4, the denouement.
Can I ask a question first?
Absolutely.
So I never thought about this before, because we know that the redeeming kinsman is going to refuse. I mean, we know that, but she doesn't know that. So based on what you said about levirate marriage, does this mean that Boaz is saying that if this guy wants to marry you, well, then that's your choice? I mean, you have no choice. This is going to happen. Or is it only a question of the land?
I'm not sure I answer. The idea of the marriage is she doesn't have to. She's not forced to do that. She's just supposed to do that in order to keep, to maintain the progeny and the line of her husband. So if either one of them doesn't want to, that's why they have the yibum ceremony, that you can get out of it. But the idea is that if now again, I'm thinking of it, like you said, there's one closer. I'm thinking of it sort of like when you think about the royal family. This one is first to the throne, second to the throne, third to the throne. So I guess this other man who doesn't even have a name, he's just called another redeemer, didn't want to, but he was apparently a closer relative than Boaz was. Also, Boaz was a man of about 80 years old at this point. I don't know if any of that is answering your question, Barbara.
Well, no, but if this redeemer said, yeah, I want to marry her,
Right. There would have been a different story.
it would have been a different story. But what
Yeah.
I'm saying is she doesn't seem to have any agency at this point.
No, she doesn't have any agency, but it
And
seems
she really can't refuse because she has no other way of living.
right. But she's it's funny. We'll get into that in a minute because she and Naomi, they have a lot to say to each other, but here she's very quiet. She doesn't say anything. And because Naomi said to her, Boaz will tell you what to do and you trust Boaz. So Boaz says, let's go check this other guy. So I guess she's acquiescing to this.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Never noticed that before. It said that Ruth was close to Boaz's girls. Who are Boaz's girls?
It means the people that were working on the threshing floor.
Oh, they're not his children.
No, they're not his children. No.
Right.
We never know if they said the Midrash says that his wife dies when Ruth and Naomi return to Bethlehem, it's because it's on the day that his wife is having it's her funeral. But I haven't seen anything that said whether Boaz himself had children or not. So when he's talking about his girls, he's not talking about his children. He's talking about the women who work.
So she was working with these women, and those were the women that his girls that Naomi was referring to.
Right. It's because it's the idea is that there's safety in numbers. I mean, you're talking about the fields, these were women, they were attractive, all kinds of things happened, whoever the workers are, I don't know who they were, but there must have been, he said, I'll make sure nobody molests you. So there must have been all kinds of molestation that would go on. It wasn't a safe thing to go out into the fields and glean. It wasn't like it wasn't an easy or a safe thing to be able to do. All right, who's reading chapter 4? Did we have someone? Is someone volunteering?
I'll read, Rabbi.
Thank you, Bob.
Meanwhile, Boaz had gone to the gate and sat down there. And now the Redeemer whom Boaz had mentioned passed by. He called, "Come over and sit down here, so-and-so."
He doesn't even get a name. He's just there. It's interesting why this was even put in. I don't know, maybe Barbara, it has to do with what you were talking about, if how much agency that she would be able to have, because it's just like you'll read, he doesn't even have a name. He's just a non-entity here.
I just wanted to interject that when we studied this the other day with Rabbi Michigan using I think from Makansky's book, and she said it was really not so much about levirate marriage, it was really about the land. And that if you read it, that he's really asking him to redeem the land, and the guy is ready to do it. And
right, but then when he finds out that she's part of the deal.
She's part of the deal.
Right.
But that is not necessarily levirate marriage. That's what Boaz threw her in so that she would be protected.
Mm. Oh, so, yeah, I read that Tikva from McKinsey. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. All right, we're only on verse 2, Bob.
So I just finishing verse 1, and he came over and sat down, verse 2. Then Boaz took 10 elders of the town and said, "Be seated here." And they sat down. He said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, now returned from the country of Moab, must sell the piece of land which belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. I thought I should disclose the matter to you and say, acquire it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you are willing to redeem it, redeem. But if you will not redeem, tell me, that I may know. For there is no one to redeem but you, and I come after you. I am willing to redeem it, he replied. Boaz continued, when you acquire the property from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the wife of the deceased, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate. The Redeemer replied, then I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own estate. You take over my right of redemption, for I am unable to exercise it. Now, this was formerly done in Israel in cases of redemption or exchange. To validate any transaction, one man would take off his sandal and hand it to the other. Such was the practice in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, acquire for yourself, he drew off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders and to the rest of the people, you are witnesses today that I am requiring from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. I am also, I'm sorry?
Machlon, yeah.
Mahlon.
Yeah.
I am also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, as my wife, so as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate, that the name of the deceased may not disappear from among his kinsmen and from the gate of his hometown. You are witnesses today.
Okay, verse 11.
All the people at the gate and the elders answered, we are. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel. Prosper in Ephratah.
Yeah, and Ephrat,
Sorry about my dog.
Is that your dog? Okay, well, we're almost done.
And perpetuate the name in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman.
We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
So Boaz married Ruth, she became his wife, and he cohabited with her. The Lord let her conceive, and she bore a son.
This is the first time that actually God is doing something we mentioned God a while back, but this is the first time that God's hand is actually doing something in this book. And it's almost at the very end. It's a few verses before the end of the book.
And the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not withheld a redeemer from you today. May his name be perpetuated in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain your old age, for he has borne your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons. Naomi took the child and held it to her bosom. She became its foster mother. And the women neighbors gave him a name, saying, a son is born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, father of David. This is the line of Perez. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Aminadab. Aminadab begot Nashon. Nashon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David.
There you go. There's the 10 generations from Judah to to David. I just wanted to say, I said that when it said that God allowed her to get pregnant and the Lord let her conceive. There's an interesting midrash also that says that God, this is what I mentioned before. How are we supposed to read this book? God was waiting for everybody to do what they were supposed to do. So Ruth did what she was supposed to do. Naomi did what she was supposed to do. Boaz did what he was supposed to do. And then the Midrash says, and God did what God was supposed to do. So when everybody else does what they're supposed to do, God is all in, and according, to the theology of the book here. And it's interesting that Naomi, it's all about Naomi, Ruth, Naomi, Ruth, Naomi, Ruth. What happens at the end in the 4th chapter? We don't hear about Naomi. They don't say anything. They don't have anything to say. It's about the men running the show again. About so we'll get into that. So thank you. So now that you have the book, because it's like I said, the book, it's a short story, but without it, it's sort of hard to talk about it without knowing what's going on. So what I love about the book of Ruth, one of the things is the timelessness of the themes. It's set, as I said, in the time of the judges, which was about 400 years after the death of Joshua until the King Saul started reigning. And we also last Shabbat, we finished reading the book of Leviticus, and a lot of these themes, the central theme in Leviticus is Kedoshim Tihiyu, you should be holy, and Leviticus tells us how we should be holy. And one of the most important things is to take care of the widows and the orphans. And it's interesting that now next week we're going to be reading the book of Ruth, and that's exactly what's going on here. The idea of taking care of those who are vulnerable. We are actually living out the themes in the book of Leviticus, taking care of the widow and the orphan, and leaving, it actually says in Leviticus to leave the edge of your fields for the needy, and looking out for those who are vulnerable. So Ruth's biblical context. So we talked about some of the stories that are echo in this, that are referenced, and we talked about the Lot story. So the 2 important ones are the Lot story and the Judah story. So I just want to go back to my screen share for 1 second. Where's my sources? Okay. So for this source, this comes from Genesis, and this is going to refer to Ruth being a Moabite. So the context is that, 1 second. Oh, so Abraham comes to tell Lot, his nephew, that Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed. And of course, they are destroyed. Remember, there was the whole thing, if there's 50 people, 40, 30, blah, blah, they couldn't even find 10 people. So the cities are going to be destroyed. And Lot and his wife and his daughters are able to escape from the city. The wife, as we know from the Midrash, the wife looks back and she's turned into a pillar of salt. And so it's just Lot and his 2 daughters. So, someone want to read this? Just the English, obviously. Lot went up from Zoar.
I'll do it.
I'll read.
Thanks. Okay.
Lot went up from Zoar and settled in the hill country with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. And the older one said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father. That night they made their father drink wine, and the older one went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. The next day the older one said to the younger one, see, I lay with father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go and lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father. That night also they made their father drink wine, and the younger one went and lay with him. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus the 2 daughters of Lot came to be with child by their father. The older one bore a son and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites today.
Right. So Moab means May Avi, from my father. So Ruth, who was a Moabite, she is the product of this incestuous relationship between Lot and his older daughter. So now the next source is about Boaz's lineage. This story with Ruth with Lot is about 1800 BCE, and about 300 years later, in 1500 BCE, we have the story of Tamar and Judah. So Judah, as we said, was the 4th son of Leah, and he had a son named Er, who married Tamar, and they were going to do, and Er died, and they did the levirate marriage. He married her brother-in-law Onan, and then Onan died, and then there was one more son whose name was Shelah, and he was young. So Judah said, well, you need to wait, and when he gets older, I'll give you Shelah. But meantime, he didn't, because he was afraid that, that Tamar was sort of cursed, and that, so far he lost 2 sons being married to this woman, and he wasn't so happy about being giving his 3rd son over. So this is the background of to where we have Judah's wife died, and Tamar is told, your father-in-law is coming up to Timnah for the sheep shearing. So she took off her widow's garb, right, because she was still mourning the loss of her 2 first husbands. She covered her face with a veil and wrapped herself up and sat down to the entrance, which is on the road to Timnah. And she saw that Shelah, the 3rd son, was grown up, but she hadn't been given to him as a wife. So when Judah saw her, he took her for a harlot. She thought it was a prostitute because she covered her face. So he turned aside by the road, and he decided, here, let me sleep with this woman, right? His wife is dead, not committing adultery, not even though there wasn't that kind of adultery in those days. So he didn't know that it was his daughter-in-law. And what she said, well, what are you going to give me for sleeping with me? And he said, well, I'll send a kid from my flock. But she said, wait a second, that's very nice, but you got to give me something now. Very nice, you're going to go home and send me the money, but I need something now. He said, okay, what shall I give you? She said, well, give me your seal and your cord. I guess, like, give me your wallet and your driver's license. So he gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she conceived by him. And then she went on her way. She took off her veil, and she put back on her widow's garb. She goes back to the city. So then Judah sent he promised that he was going to send the kid. So he sends the kid to redeem the pledge, but he couldn't find her. He comes back. He says, where's the cult prostitute? And he says, well, there's no prostitute here. We don't know what you're talking about. He says, so the man returns to Judah. He says, I couldn't find her. And the townspeople said there was no prostitute there. So Judah didn't really think about it. He says, all right, let them, she'll keep my wallet and my driver's license, and I'll get another one. I don't want to be a laughing stock. Okay. So 3 months later, so Judah said, he's told, your daughter-in-law Tamar, she's pregnant. She's supposedly waiting for your 3rd son, and she's pregnant, and bring her to me. And Judah says, and let her be burned. He's totally indignant because he doesn't realize what's going on. As she was being brought out, she sent the message to her father-in-law. She says, I'm with child by the man to whom these belong. And she says, take a look at them. Whose cord and whose staff are this? Whose wallet and whose license is this? She's not embarrassing him, but she's just letting him decide how he's going to play this out. And Judah recognized right away, and he says, she's more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her my son, and he was not intimate with her again. So, and that progeny, that's where we get Boaz. So we have these 2 illicit we have the father-in-law sleeping with the daughter-in-law. That's how we get Boaz. And we have the father Lot sleeping with the daughters. That's how we get Moab, and that's how we get Ruth. And these 2 illicit dynasties come together to create the dynasty of David, of King David. And not only King David, but that's where the Messiah is supposed to come out of there. So it's very interesting to see that there's sort of when you talk about the idea of return, the idea of the return of these two the ones who create the dynasty of David have returned from their illicit starts, the illicit beginnings of their ancestors. So it's no secret that in the Judaism is a patriarchal religion, and Ruth is the paradigm of sort of a patriarchal narrative. You need to have a progeny. You need to have son. That's what you have to do. And in the book of Ruth, that's exactly what happens. Her husband dies, and Naomi decides that they're going to do anything to make sure that she has a son. So according to my Bible professor, Rabbi Amy Kalmanovsky, all of the Tanakh, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, they all deal with gender. And what makes the book of Ruth so interesting is that it focuses on 2 female characters, Ruth and Naomi. And interesting because, again, the book is called the book of Ruth. She starts out not being Jewish, just like last week we studied Job, who was also not Jewish. So the focus is on Ruth and Naomi and how they use the legal system, right, to be able to change history, the legal system of going through the levirate marriage and trying to create, to keep Machlon's name alive. Ruth is about as other as you can get, right? She's a woman She's a foreigner and she's poor. And so when the book of Leviticus tells us that we have to be holy and we have to take care of the others, so that's what Ruth is. She's the most other that you can be. And there's, like I said, there was very little about God in the book of Ruth. The first time we actually see God doing something, or God's hand, is when Ruth gives birth. Apparently, it does. The Midrash says actually that when she married Boaz, he was 80 years old, and she got pregnant that night, and he died on that night, on that wedding night. So it's interesting. At the beginning, we have Elimelech, and Elimelech, he's his purpose in this book is to just die. I mean, we don't really know anything about everything we know about him is from the Midrash, but from the actual text, we don't learn anything about Elimelech. His purpose is just to leave and die. And Boaz's purpose is to be able to orchestrate everything legally so that they can have this baby. Ruth is also a very human-centric book, right? It's because we have very little God there, the same like in the book of Esther and the book of Kohelet, also very little God. And it has proportionally a lot of dialogue. We read that Ruth and Naomi speak to each other a lot, and Ruth speaks to Boaz. There's a lot of dialogue, which is very central to the book. Like I said, it's interesting that the whole scheme of marrying Boaz as a redeemer is because Ruth and Naomi were proactive. They were proactive, the women, and this is also unusual, especially in a book in the Bible, that the women are proactive. Well, actually, when you think about it, Rachel and Leah, the women at the end of Ruth, they bless Naomi and Ruth that she should be like Rachel and Leah. And Rachel and Leah were also proactive about trying, right? And so was Sarah, when you think about it, and Rebecca, especially the women who are barren. They're proactive in a way of being able to have a child. That is the most important thing. You have a child so that the dynasty lives on. And then Ruth, who starts out as a foreigner, she ultimately becomes integrated into the society. So the relationship between Naomi and Ruth is really a very interesting one. It changes over time. It starts out by being sort of hierarchical, right? It's the mother-in-law, the wealthy mother-in-law, and then with the daughter-in-law. And then it starts to evolve. First it's hierarchical, then it becomes more sort of more on an even keel. Naomi is trying to get Ruth and Orpah to leave, say, we don't want you to don't come back with me. You should go and go back to your families. And Ruth is adamant she's not going to do that. Naomi, I think, sees great potential in Ruth, and so she's willing to sort of take her along. And Ruth, on the other hand, sees this older woman by herself. Again, we don't have a sense of the ages. I mean, but she's the older woman, and she realizes, she doesn't want her to travel back to Bethlehem by herself, 45-mile journey by foot. And so she says that she's going to go, that she'll go with her. And Ruth is willing to leave her pampered life and tie her fate to Naomi.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Oh, you see? Okay, yes. What's up?
It says at the end, after the baby is born, Naomi is made the foster mother of the baby. She takes care of the baby. I don't understand why. Ruth is still alive. Ruth hasn't died. So why is Naomi made the foster mother?
It's interesting. At the end of the book, which is called the Book of Ruth, it really feels like it's Naomi's story, doesn't it?
Also, it seems to be punishing Ruth. She did a good deed, and they're taking her baby away from her. And
I don't think it's so much they're taking the baby. I don't think it's so much taking the baby away. I sort of see it as Ruth became, the way I'm looking at it is that Ruth became an extension of Naomi, and therefore this child is an extension of Naomi, and sort of a recompense for all the loss that she had. She lost her 2 sons, she lost her husband, she lost her standing, and she had lost everything. And in the end, I sort of see her as the same way when you think about Yocheved, the daughter of the mother of Moshe, who came to the palace when the daughter of Pharaoh found him, and she said, we need somebody to sort of help raise her, and so raise him. So I sort of, that's how I sort of think of Naomi in that sense, that she's getting to live out something that she did not have an opportunity to do before, through Ruth and through this child.
So meantime, what does Ruth do? Especially since you tell me that Boaz, which I didn't know, well, it's only Midrash.
It's
So
the Midrash, right?
right, that he dies right away. So she doesn't, she's a widow now too. And can't have any more children. And her mother-in-law has her baby. So I don't know.
Yeah, I got the impression that, I mean, because when it's empty, when the text doesn't tell you, when there's silence, you can fill it in however you want. I guess I was thinking of Naomi and Ruth sort of co-mothering this child. And I don't know how much I don't know how old Ruth was. I don't know how much longer she was going to be around, which is why I think that Naomi is tacitly, Ruth rather, is tacitly acquiescing. Yes, you can sort of be part of this raising of this child, because it's through you that I even have this child. Yeah, Barbara.
I just had a comment and a question. The comment would be like someone whose grandmother lives in their house.
Mm-hmm.
And then they after the grandmother dies, the kid says later on in life, she was like my second mother. So that's what I always envision. It's not like they took the baby away from Ruth. My question was about your comment that Naomi was the well-to-do mother-in-law, but as far as I know, she wasn't well-to-do. They went to Moab because there was a famine. Then they were in Moab for more than 10 years. But then when her husband and her sons died, she really had nothing. And she came back and she said she was empty. She walked back, and if it hadn't been for Ruth bringing food into the house, they would have had no food.
Right. I totally, thank you for clarifying that. I totally agree with that. When I said at the beginning, she was the wealthy mother-in-law, right? Because they had moved they left because he was a chieftain and he was a leader of the community, and they just didn't want to deal with all the poor people. They were leaders. They were prominent members in the society. And so she married, that was the family that she had married into. It's interesting that the text never tells us, marrying Moabite women. A lot of this is a backdrop against Israel and Moab. Okay. There's also in Deuteronomy, it says, don't be with the Moabites. They're going to bring you to idolatry. Don't hang out with the men, and certainly don't hang out with the women, because they're going to make you idolatrous. So it's interesting that of all, the text doesn't tell us why Machlon and Kilion marry, why they're killed, but the Midrash says it's because they married Moabite women. So that also is very much at play in the book here.
Can I just ask one
Sure.
genealogy question? So the Moabites came from Lot?
The Moabites came from Lot, yes.
Lot was Jewish?
No, Lot was not Jewish.
He
Abraham was the first Jew.
He was nephew of Abraham.
Yeah, but Abraham was the first.
Converted.
Right.
He never converted.
Right. It was Abraham was the only, remember Abraham, if you remember the story with the idols, and so his brothers were not into this. He was into this.
Okay.
So his nephew was not Jewish. Right.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? It's just, okay. I'm just trying to, as I see what time it is. It's interesting that when also the relationship between Ruth and Naomi becomes at some point covenantal. When Ruth actually says to Naomi, where you go, I will go, your people will be my people. That is a language of treaties. When two kings in the ancient Israel, in the ancient Near East, when they would make a treaty, that was the language that they would use. So their relationship goes from being unequal to being equal, and even to being covenantal. And there are some midrashim that say that it was as if Ruth represented the Israelites, and Naomi represented God. And then Ruth was, cling, just the same way that the Israelites want to cling to God, Ruth wants to cling to Naomi. But it's interesting that when Ruth says, "Where you go, I'll go. Your people are my people. Where you die, I will die," there's no answer in the text from Naomi. So what does that mean? That the fact that silences in the Torah are both frustrating and they're also beautiful. They're frustrating because we don't really know what happened, but they're beautiful because that's when the midrashim can come in and the rabbis and we can sort of write the story that way that feels right to us. So was it stony silence? Was Naomi focusing on herself? I mean, she's very traumatized. She lost her husband. She lost her 2 sons. She was left alone. One of the midrashim, I think in the Gemara, she's called the Share de Share. She's the remnant of the remnant. Like everything is gone, and sort of the very end, the last little bit that's left, that's what then Naomi had become. That's why when she goes back and she says, "Call me don't call me Naomi, pleasant one. Call me Mara. I'm the embittered one." So she doesn't respond. So is she feeling frustrated? Is she just too depressed to deal with it? Or is she thrilled about this? Is she happy? We don't know. The text never tells us anything. I mean, Ruth makes this beautiful declaration and Naomi has nothing to say. The idea of return, as we saw in the first chapter, was very, very important. There's the leaving and then there's the returning. That Naomi comes back, she returns, and Ruth, she doesn't quite return, but it's said of converts that Jews by choice, that they are returning to whatever their soul needs, that it's a return on their part. They return to Beit Lechem. The dynasty is returned to Ruth. It's interesting when you think about the couples, that's the pairs that started out at the beginning of the book. You had Naomi and Elimelech, and then there was Ruth and Machlon, and Orpah and Ruth and Orpah, and Machlon and Kilion. And you think about who survives. Who were the survivors of the pairs, right? Elimelech died. We have Ruth who survived. Of Orpah left. So Ruth was a survivor. I'm sorry. Naomi was a survivor with Elimelech. Ruth is a survivor from Orpah. And of Machlon and Kilion, even though they both die, Machlon is a name that continues on because it's through Ruth having the baby with Boaz that Machlon's name is continued. So the idea of return was really interesting. Also, when there is the famine, there's a national tragedy, and it's interesting that there's a parallel between the national tragedy and the Ruth and Elimelech family personal tragedy, the familial tragedy. So when Ruth says, when the book of Ruth says that Naomi heard that the famine was over, so that indicated to her that the national tragedy was over, but there was no way for her personal tragedy to be over. And that's part of maybe what she saw in Ruth was the potential that Ruth had to be able to continue the family line and maybe rebuild something from the nothingness that she was left with. There's an interesting connection. I see it's, I'll keep this brief. There's an interesting connection between the book of Ruth and the book of Job, right? Because we studied Job last week, right? All these things happened to Job for apparently no reason. And we have the same thing with Naomi. We don't know why all this befalls her. I mean, is she righteous the same way that Job was? Is she a righteous woman that all these things befell her for no reason? Or should she have tried to be more proactive? Should she have said to Elimelech, "No, we can't leave the people who are starving. We need to stay here with our people"? Or maybe she shouldn't have gone with him. Not so easy in those days. But the idea of is she the tzedeket? Is she the righteous person to whom all these bad things happen to, sort of like with Job? And if you recall also from last week, at the end of the book of Job, God is angry with Job's friends for saying negative things about Job. They said, well, they kept telling him, "You must have done something. That's why all these tragedies have befallen you." And at the end of Job, right, he lives to be 120. His fortune is doubled. He gets 10 more children, and the only reason that God restores Job's life is because Job prays for his friends. When God is angry with the friends, Job prays for his friends, and God then repays repays Job by restoring his life. And that's what happens also in the book of Ruth. Life was horrible for Ruth and Naomi, and only when they stopped focusing on their own, what was going on with them, but they reached out to each other, did things start to change from them. One of my classmates, Rabbi Zohar Atkins, he had an interesting way of looking at the comparing Naomi and Job, and he said that that Job's friends tried to force their theology on him. They said, you must have done something wrong. Like, they were so sure that they were right. But once Naomi and Ruth return to Beit Lechem, the community accepts them. There's no blame. There's no recrimination. They feel bad for them because they see how impoverished Naomi had become. But they're reaching out to them. They're meeting them where they are. They're not forcing them. They're not forcing on them, you did this and that's why you're punished. They said, you know what, you're back. We're happy to see you. They welcome them back into the community. And so another sort of a return on their part as well. And so I just wanted to conclude by talking about just take a minute or two to talk about the idea of connectedness in the book of Ruth. Because the kindness and the connectedness, people are connecting with each other is what impels the story forward, right? There's the moment when Boaz finds Ruth gleaning in the field, and he says he promises her protection, and she says, eat and drink and stay with my girls and you'll be safe. Then there's a moment when Ruth returns to Naomi after gleaning in Boaz's field, and the moment when Boaz withholds himself from Ruth, right, on the threshing floor, and he says, no, let me do this in the right way. There's a moment when the townspeople witness Boaz's commitment to Ruth, and they welcome her, and they bless her that she should be like Rachel and Leah. There's a moment when the women of the Bethlehem bless Naomi. And all of these moments, they show us how these human acts of kindness and loyalty and kindness and loyalty and chesed can bring a blessing. And when I think about Ruth's Torah after the past year that we've lived through, where we didn't have connectedness with people, when for so long we longed for that connectedness to our loved ones, to the people you used to see when you went to the gym or to the supermarket, just all the people that we used to see in our lives, and we weren't connected with them anymore. And now we've sort of feels like we're coming towards the end of that in some way. We were living in a virtual world, and it feels like a little bit that we're coming back into a normal world. We're able to start seeing people, and it feels like the idea of connectedness in Ruth feels very connected to certainly to our lives today, that we knew what it was like to not be able to be connected to people, and how that has affected relationships. I mean, there was a beautiful article, I think, Erica Brown wrote about how some relationships will survive this time that we've been in lockdown, and some won't. I mean, obviously our close relationships will survive, but if you had a favorite person, maybe you had a favorite store that you went to, and that store just didn't survive because it just couldn't survive the lockdown. So a lot of, not that those were integral, but those were moments of connectedness where we had a chance to be kind to somebody else. And so my prayer for all of us is that now that these moments of connectedness are at hand or close at hand, and that we'll be able to cling to the people that we love, and we'll be able to share that connectedness, and be able to live out the kindness and the connectedness and those important themes from the book of Ruth. So if you have an opportunity to listen to it in shul next week, or if your synagogue isn't going to be reading it, but we've now read the book, and take the lessons to heart. And I just hope that we can all enjoy the connectedness that we've been missing over the last year. And that's
Amen.
my
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank
that's
you,
my
Rabbi.
takeaway.
Rabbi.
Thank you very
Wonderful.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay,
Thank
be
you.
well, everyone. Have a good Chag Sameach. Enjoy your Shavuot.
Thank you. It was terrific,
Thank
Rabbi.